From today, we're a family of 5. If you resist me, we are getting divorced.
Suddenly, my in-laws and sister-in-law, Emily, moved into our home. To my shock, my husband, Josh, had decided to move all 3 of them in without consulting me. I don't recall ever hearing about this plan. Despite my protests at this outrageous decision, none of his family paid the slightest attention to me.
From now on, I'll support the whole family. Leave it to me.
To me, this scene felt like a complete nightmare. Fine. Then let's get divorced. I mustered the biggest smile I could and handed Josh divorce papers. His jaw dropped and he froze in place. Even his parents and Emily were stunned into silence, and the room fell dead quiet. Seizing the moment, I pulled the divorce papers from my bag.
Hannah, you're joking, right?
As soon as Josh saw the papers, his face turned ashen. He clearly hadn't expected me to be this well prepared. Seeing his panic, I smirked inwardly. My name is Hannah Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I work in the planning department of a major corporation. This company had always been my dream, so when I received the job offer, I was so happy I almost cried. I steadily climbed the career ladder, and in my 5th year, I was transferred to the planning department, which had been my goal from the start. This is now my 5th year in the planning department. Every day is extremely busy, but my boss is kind, and I'm fortunate to have great coworkers. The work is fulfilling and enjoyable. 3 years ago, I got married. My coworkers were surprised, saying, "Hannah got married? Really?" That's how much of a workaholic I'm known to be, both by myself and others. I never really had a strong desire to get married and thought I'd probably remain single for the rest of my life. What changed that mindset was meeting my husband, Josh. I met Josh through our mutual friend. He's a year older than me. When we first met, Josh had just started a new job.
I'm still getting the hang of things, but I really want to do my best. It's the job I've always wanted to do.
When Josh spoke those words, his eyes were unwavering, and I immediately recognized he was just like me. He was clearly a workaholic too. I wanted to get to know Josh better, so I took the initiative and offered to exchange contact information. This was the first time I had ever done something like that in my life. After that, we hit it off almost instantly. We started dating 6 months later and got married 2 years after. However, when we got married, I made it a condition that we both continue working. After all, this job was something I had always dreamed of. If marriage meant I had to quit, I wouldn't go through with it. Josh understood how I felt.
I care about my job too, so I totally get where you're coming from, Hannah. Let's split the household chores and support each other as we go.
True to his word, Josh was very helpful around the house. If he got home early, he'd cook dinner, and he'd willingly do laundry and cleaning too. I often thought about how lucky I was to have met such a wonderful person. I felt marrying him was the best decision I'd ever made. Unfortunately, those happy days didn't last for long. One day when I got home, I found Josh feeling really down. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he'd made a huge mistake at work. Apparently, it had escalated into a major issue involving his client.
I'm done. This is the worst.
He was completely dazed and in a state of utter shock. But a single mistake isn't enough to ruin his career. With that in mind, I encouraged Josh over and over again. Don't give up. You can fix this mistake moving forward. I know you can do it, Josh. However, it seems my support missed the mark. As it turns out, Josh had been making careless errors even before this incident and was frequently scolded by his boss. In the end, Josh was removed from the promotion track and became what they call a window seat employee. This was clearly a huge shock to him. Since then, Josh became reckless and self-destructive. The man who used to speak so passionately about his work was gone. Now, he drinks every night and complains about his boss and coworkers.
You've got it so good, Hannah. Your salary's great, and your job is going smoothly.
He'd mutter things like that and then look at me with resentment. That's not true, Josh. You still have.
Shut up. I have no future. I'll be stuck as a window seat employee for the rest of my life.
Josh let out deep sighs constantly. Failing despite his efforts seemed to have made him hate everything. But everyone goes through times like that. I tried to encourage and support him as much as I could. You'll be fine, Josh. If you keep working hard, your boss will notice someday. However, no matter what I said, he took it negatively.
Your company is different, Hannah. My boss isn't as kind as yours. I'll never have a chance to move up anymore.
As this pattern continued, I didn't know what to say to him anymore. If I tried to cheer him up, it only made him feel worse. Gradually, our conversations dwindled, and our relationship as a couple began to grow colder. At the same time, Josh stopped doing any housework. When I got home late from work, I'd find dirty dishes piled up in the kitchen and clothes tossed carelessly around. Josh, can you at least do the dishes? When I finally couldn't take it anymore and pointed it out, Josh snapped, his eyes narrowing.
What? You do it, Hannah. I had to eat leftovers from the fridge because you got home late.
Leftovers? That's not true. I made those ahead of time.
Same difference. I just wanted to eat a freshly cooked meal.
Josh had started taking out his frustration on me when things didn't go his way. If I didn't do housework, he'd complain, and even when I did, he'd make snide remarks. But I didn't want to use work as an excuse for not doing house chores. Being naturally stubborn, I pushed myself to get everything done. Still, it seemed like he wasn't happy about that either. He became moodier by the day and started spending most weekends away from home. Josh's usual destination? His parents' house. It was about a 15-minute drive from where we lived. I could only assume he went there to vent about me to his parents. Josh's parents were lenient with him but strict with me. They were the perfect audience for him to vent his complaints about me. As a result, I regularly received lectures from his mother, Jane.
Hannah, I heard from Josh.
Jane's calls always started with those words, followed by a long lecture every time.
Josh works hard every day, you know, and yet leftovers? Don't you feel sorry for him? You're his wife, so you need to take better care of him.
It seemed like Jane took Josh's complaints at face value. Most of the time, His stories were far from the truth, and I often had no idea why I was being scolded. Josh was probably saying things to make me look bad. Since Jane was entirely on Josh's side, no matter how much I tried to explain, she would ignore me. So whenever Jane called, I would just pretend to listen and let it go. That worked fine for phone calls, but visiting their house was another story. Trips home for Christmas or Thanksgiving were always a real hassle.
A wife neglecting housework is absolutely unacceptable. You should take a page from Jane's book.
That's right. Tell her, Paul.
Every time I saw Paul, my father-in-law, he would complain about me, and Jane would always chime in to agree with him. Meanwhile, Josh would sit there grinning happily. This routine happened every single time, so I'd start dreading our visits well in advance. To make matters worse, Josh's younger sister Emily, who was turning 30 this year, also lived at their house.
Oh, Hannah. Long time no see. I've heard all about it from Josh.
Emily was divorced and had moved back home after her marriage ended. She didn't work and was living off their parents. Because of this, she seemed to have no understanding of my dedication to my job.
A wife who doesn't take care of her husband is a failure. Maybe Josh should join the divorced club too?
That's actually not a bad idea. Maybe I'll get divorced too.
Josh and Emily looked at each other and laughed as they joked about it. Even if it was just a joke, mentioning divorce in front of your wife was completely inappropriate. I couldn't help but look at the two of them with disgust. Going to their house only meant enduring insults. Knowing this, I had no desire to visit. But to be honest, part of me wanted to stick around to see what would eventually happen to Josh's family. In reality, Paul is nearing retirement. He had hoped to be rehired, but apparently he wasn't satisfied with the terms offered. So unless he finds another job, he'll be unemployed starting next year. On top of that, Jane is a homemaker and has never worked outside the house. If Paul retires as planned, they'll have to rely on his retirement pay, savings, and eventually Social Security to make ends meet. The real issue, however, is Emily. Josh's parents are overly lenient with her and never tell her to look for a job. In fact, they even give her an allowance every month. Once Paul retires, the three of them will likely face serious financial difficulties. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of life the three of them would lead going forward. Meanwhile, Josh seemed to be thinking about what he could do to support his family. Watching him stare at his paycheck stub and agonize over it, I assumed he was considering helping the three of them financially. But Josh is stuck in a window seat position and doesn't earn much. There's no way he could afford to send money to support all three of them. Because of that, I'd sometimes catch him glancing at me. Occasionally, he'd start to say something only to stop and mutter, "Never mind." Josh was probably trying to ask me about sending money to his parents. Even though I understood, I avoided bringing it up. After all, his parents and Emily had always been cold toward me. I was firmly against the idea of supporting people like that. I had already decided to reject the idea if Josh ever suggested it. One day, something unexpected happened. When I came home as usual, I heard voices from the living room, one man and two women. I rushed to the living room.
Oh, you're finally home.
Honestly, you really do come home late.
Seriously, do you know how long we've been waiting?
To my shock, there they were, Josh's parents and Emily. I was utterly stunned by their surprise visit. Josh hadn't said anything about them coming over. Completely confused, I turned to Josh. Hey, what's going on? Why are they here?
Well, because I invited them. From today, we're a family of 5. If you resist me, we are getting divorced.
What? Josh gave me a confident smile. What on earth was he talking about? I stood there in shock, unable to process the situation. He began speaking enthusiastically.
From now on, the 3 of them are going to live with us.
Unbelievably, Josh had decided to move his parents and Emily in without consulting me. Looking around, I noticed dozens of boxes stacked everywhere. They weren't just in the living room, they had invaded my room as well. Apparently, all of them belonged to his parents and Emily.
Since Dad recently retired, they decided to sell their house and move in with us. Without Dad working, the 3 of them won't have any income. So from now on, you and I will support them together.
Apparently, the sale of his parents' house had already been finalized, and the contract was signed. Josh continued speaking as if everything was perfectly normal, but this was way too selfish. This was all too much, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. I didn't hear anything about this. Even if they sold their house, why are they moving here? However, arguing here and now wouldn't help, as I had no one on my side.
Hey, it's ridiculous for a wife to oppose something her husband has decided. We're family, so living together is only natural. Looking forward to it.
And just so you know, housework is the wife's responsibility, okay? That includes doing it for us too. Now we can relax and enjoy life every day.
Oh. Hannah, can I use your room? I mean, I'd really like to have my own space. You can sleep in the living room.
Josh's parents and Emily continued talking, completely ignoring how I felt. Just listening to them was enough to give me a headache. On top of that, Josh, likely trying to show off in front of his family, chimed in.
From now on, I'll support the whole family. Leave it to me.
Watching Josh respond so confidently was downright painful. But his parents and Emily praised him for it. From my perspective, the whole scene was a living nightmare. However, there was no way I was going to go along with this. I had no reason to comply. Living with the 5 of them was something I was absolutely determined to avoid. I'm sorry, but I can't agree to this. This entire situation was decided solely by Josh without my input. I made it clear and firmly asked Josh's parents and Emily to leave the house. However, the 3 of them immediately started arguing back.
What are you talking about? We're family.
Exactly. Telling us to leave? That's pretty bold for just a wife.
Hannah, you don't get a say in this. Josh is the one who makes all the decisions.
I figured they weren't the type to listen to anything I said. So I turned to Josh and demanded his explanation. Why would you make such a major decision without consulting me? Shouldn't we have discussed this together?
Because this is my house. I don't have any obligation to consult you. Besides, It's rude to kick out my precious family. Are you really ready to face a divorce? I'm serious.
Instead of explaining himself, Josh tried to force his opinion on me. It seemed he thought that threatening divorce would make me accept the living arrangement. Why was he so confident? Fine. Then let's get divorced. I smiled as brightly as I could and presented the idea of divorce. Josh, who had been the one to bring it up, froze with his mouth hanging open. His parents and Emily were also at a loss for words, and the room fell into complete silence. I immediately pulled the divorce papers out of my bag. For the record, I had already signed them. All that was left was for Josh to sign, and they'd be ready to file.
Hannah, you're joking, right?
As soon as Josh saw the papers, his face turned pale. He clearly hadn't expected me to be so thoroughly prepared. Seeing him panic, I smirked inwardly. The truth is, I had decided on divorce the moment I saw Josh contemplating supporting his parents. I knew Josh wouldn't be able to ignore his family's struggles. It was only a matter of time before he suggested sending money to his parents. But given his low salary, he could only afford to send maybe $100 or $200 a month at best. That wouldn't be enough to make a difference in their lives. Eventually, he'd likely ask me to contribute from my income. That was something I absolutely couldn't accept, so I decided to take this opportunity to divorce him. Living a life filled with constant snide remarks, I had completely lost affection for Josh. However, I hadn't anticipated that he would decide on living together without consulting me. Josh's unexpected actions left me utterly astonished. You can't just make such a big decision on your own. Are you ignoring my opinion? This is your house, yes, but it's my house too.
Well, maybe that's true, but divorce is going too far. Just calm down a little.
Josh looked at me with an awkward expression. If he really thought divorce was an overreaction, then our values were completely misaligned from the start. I am perfectly calm. I've made this decision with a clear mind. I've realized that I can't live with someone like you who makes major decisions on their own without consulting me. I've also realized we can't continue as husband and wife. Above all, I couldn't imagine living under the same roof as his parents and Emily. Josh had seen how much I endured their constant snide remarks. The fact that he still decided on living together showed he didn't respect me at all. A husband like that? No thanks. So will you sign this now? I presented the divorce papers to him again. Josh started sweating profusely.
Wait, I understand how you feel, Hannah, but don't rush into this. We're married, and I'm sure we can work this out if we just talk.
Ironically, in this situation, the only one against the divorce was Josh.
What are you saying, Josh? It's obvious you should divorce a wife like that as soon as possible.
Exactly. Why haven't you gone through with it yet? Josh, a guy like you is way too good for a woman like Hannah.
Josh, let's start living here together as a happy family of 4 from now on.
Well,
Josh's parents and Emily strongly supported the divorce, practically shoving him into it. Meanwhile, Josh turned pale and was at a complete loss for words. In front of his family, he couldn't afford to back down or act submissive toward me. After all, he usually acted arrogant and condescending toward me. Showing a weak side in front of them wasn't an option. Knowing this, I stayed silent and simply waited for Josh to sign the papers.
Come on, Josh. Be a man and sign it now.
Paul, oblivious to Josh's feelings, urged him on.
Oh, okay.
Unable to retreat, Josh finally picked up the pen with trembling hands and signed the divorce papers. His parents and Emily looked on with bright smiles. When he was done, Josh looked at me with an expression as if he were about to burst into tears. Thank you. I'll take care of filing this then. Josh seemed unable to do anything, but not in response. All that was left was to submit the divorce papers. So how long do you plan to stay here? We're no longer family since we're divorcing. Can you all leave right now? I turned to Josh's parents and Emily and firmly told them to leave immediately. The three of them stared at me, dumbfounded. Josh, perhaps realizing what was about to happen, was visibly trembling. Come on, hurry up and get out. Don't forget to take your belongings with you, I said as cheerfully as I could. At that moment, Paul's face turned bright red.
What are you talking about? You're the one who should leave.
Taking Paul's lead, Jane and Emily chimed in.
That's right. You're not family anymore, so you should be the one to leave. How long do you plan on staying here?
Hannah, we'll pack up your stuff and send it to you later. So don't worry, you can leave anytime.
You really don't understand anything, do you? I had suspected it, but it seemed Josh hadn't told the three of them the truth. Technically, I didn't owe them an explanation, but I decided to explain anyway. This house belongs to me.
What are you talking about? Maybe it was the two of your house before, but now that you're divorced, it's Josh's house, and by extension, our house.
No, I mean, it's my house. Paul turned immediately to Josh, seeking confirmation. But Josh, avoiding eye contact, hung his head in silence. He must have realized the truth from Josh's reaction.
What's the meaning of this?
Paul shouted at the top of his lungs. The reality was that the house was registered in my name. Given my higher income, we had agreed it would make sense for me to be the owner. On top of that, I had been the one paying the mortgage entirely. After all, Josh was stuck in a window seat employee with a low salary. I thought it would be too much to expect him to handle the mortgage payments. Well, I had already expected that Josh hadn't told his parents about it. You've got a lot of pride and didn't want to show your family anything embarrassing, right? That's why you kept quiet about it, isn't it?
What are you saying? That's ridiculous. Josh, you're the owner of this house, aren't you?
Jane repeatedly pressed Josh for confirmation. However, Josh still didn't nod.
This can't be true.
Now do you understand? Since Josh agreed to the divorce, there's no reason to let the four of you stay in this house. So, can you all leave together? I calmly stated the facts and made it clear they needed to leave. But even after all that, Josh's parents and Emily didn't move an inch.
That's a lie. Stop making things up.
What does this mean? Josh, you've always said, I'm the one providing for this house. It can't be true that Hannah earns more than you, right?
It doesn't matter if you're the owner or not. We have nowhere else to go. We're not leaving, no matter what.
Paul raised his voice. Jane kept questioning Josh. And Emily glared at me with a sullen expression. This whirlwind of events had started the moment I came home from work. Before I knew it, the clock had passed midnight. Since I had work tomorrow, I couldn't waste any more time dealing with them. I decided to leave the house for now and stay somewhere else for the night. Well then, I'll take my leave for now. As soon as I said that, their faces lit it up. They probably thought they'd succeeded in kicking me out of the house. Of course, that wasn't the case. Make sure to leave by tomorrow, okay? And just so you know, I have no problem tossing your belongings outside.
That's completely unreasonable.
Outsiders have no right to say anything. Even as Paul continued to shout, I ignored him and left the house. Josh remained silent and awkward until the very end. He was probably trying to figure out what to do next in his own way. After leaving the house, I went straight to submit the divorce papers. Finally, I was free from that family for good. The day I first asked Josh for his contact information, hoping to get closer to him, now feels like a distant memory. From now on, I vowed to be more careful when deciding who to grow close to. The next day, after work, I nervously returned home. To my surprise, Josh was the only one there. For a moment, I got excited, thinking the four of them had decided to leave, but then I noticed the boxes were still there. Apparently, his parents and Emily were temporarily staying at a business hotel.
I thought it would be impossible to have a proper conversation with you if the three of them stayed.
Josh said apologetically. Maybe in his own way, Josh was reflecting on his actions. That's what I thought based on his demeanor. But I couldn't have been more wrong.
Hannah, please, could you let us have this house?
It turned out Josh was planning for the four of them to live here. Since they had sold their house, they were now without a place to live. On top of that, with limited finances, securing a home must have been their priority. However, with Josh's salary, there was no way he could afford the mortgage on this house. Even if you all live here, if the mortgage can't be paid, you'll eventually be evicted, you know? Initially, they might be able to cover it with retirement funds or savings, but the mortgage had a long way to go. Eventually, the four of them could end up homeless. Are you okay with that? Or do you have some way to pay the mortgage?
Well, that's...
Josh's eyes darted around nervously at my question. Then, he suddenly turned to me and begged.
Hannah, I'm begging you. Could you please pay the mortgage for this house?
It turned out Josh was planning to have me pay the mortgage. I was so beyond shocked by his request that I couldn't help but laugh. Listen, I divorced you because I didn't want to support your parents, right? If I pay the mortgage, that would still end up being support, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but...
Sorry, but you'll have to find someone else. We're divorced now, and I don't want anything to do with you or your family anymore.
Don't say that.
Josh seemed completely cornered. Tears were welling up in his eyes. Even so, I felt nothing. This was all his own doing. If you're not willing to leave, I can pursue legal action, you know? This house was in my name. If he decided to stay, I wouldn't hesitate to take action. Josh looked at me, utterly stunned. He must have realized that staying any longer wasn't an option.
Fine, I'll leave.
Panicking, Josh finally decided to leave the house. I wasn't sure if Josh would be able to convince the three of them, but it was at least a step forward. Afterward, Josh reluctantly left the house to talk to his parents and Emily. However, just as I expected, he wasn't able to persuade them. When I came home the next day, his parents and Emily were back at the house. Josh stood in the corner of the room, avoiding eye contact with me. Since he had said yesterday that they'd leave, he probably couldn't bear to face me. Ignoring Josh entirely, the three of them started yelling at me as soon as they saw me.
Josh told us everything, kicking us out at all costs. We were once family, you know.
Can't you have a little compassion? If we're kicked out, we have nowhere to go.
Since talking to Josh wasn't working, we came ourselves. Just give us this house.
Given that the sale of their previous house was already finalized, it wasn't coming back. Canceling it would result in penalty fees. Even that is probably something the three of them can't afford. In their desperate state, it seemed they weren't afraid of me at all.
You were able to live here because of Josh's earnings, weren't you? And now you're throwing us out as soon as the divorce is finalized. You're heartless.
Oh, Josh's earnings, you say?
That's right. Even if you were the one paying the mortgage, isn't it fair for Josh to get this house in the property division?
At that moment, I realized something. The three of them had no idea how much Josh actually earned.
You've been living off Josh's money, and now you're taking everything from us? You're the worst.
I see. That explains a lot. It seemed they believed I was paying the mortgage while Josh was covering the rest of the household expenses. When I glanced at Josh, he gave a nervous smile. He clearly didn't want his family to know the truth. But if he wasn't going to tell them, then I had no choice but to do it myself. It seems there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. I wasn't just paying the mortgage, you know? I was also covering the majority of the living expenses.
What?
Wait, Hannah.
Josh frantically tried to interrupt, but it was too late for that. The three of them looked stunned and silently stared at me in disbelief. It seemed Josh's pride was as high as ever if he was still putting on airs in front of his family.
What do you mean? Are you saying Josh wasn't contributing much money?
Yes, that's correct. Of course, there were things Josh did pay for, but I was the one covering most of the expenses. Josh's income was mostly consumed by his own bills and rarely went toward our household expenses. However, his parents and Emily appeared to have completely bought into his lies. Josh had tried to impress his family by exaggerating his earnings.
We're both contributing equally to our lives. But, you know, Hannah focuses too much on work and neglects the housework. And by the way, I earn more than she does.
Apparently, he had said things like that many times. Recently, the truth began to unravel regarding the mortgage payments, but his family probably wanted to believe him simply because he was family.
Are you saying that everything Josh told us back home was a complete lie?
Paul clenched his fists, glaring at Josh. Realizing the situation was getting worse, Josh quickly tried to calm him down.
No, you've got it wrong. I just wanted to be someone my family could rely on. I might have exaggerated things a little, so please, don't get so mad.
But such words did nothing to quell Paul's anger.
We trusted you this whole time. That's why we sold our house and decided to rely on you.
What?
You told us to think of it as being on a steady ship with such confidence. So we discussed it and decided to sell the house.
Wait a second. I didn't hear anything about that.
It turned out that Josh's lies were the reason his parents sold their house. Even I was left speechless by this revelation. While Josh was at fault for lying, it was equally strange that his parents didn't consult him. It seemed they all had a habit of making major decisions unilaterally. In some ways, they were a family of kindred spirits. So, if Josh had just been honest about his salary from the start, none of this would have happened. When I said that, Josh's face twisted with discomfort.
So everything is Josh's fault? This is the worst. How are you going to take responsibility for this? If things stay like this, we'll.
Emily lashed out at a stunned Josh, who remained silent. However, I didn't think Josh was the only one to blame. If Paul had secured his reemployment, and if Jane and Emily had started working, this wouldn't have happened. Didn't this all happen because every one of you relied on someone else to solve your problems? You might think of yourselves as a caring family, but in reality, none of you ever lifted a finger to help each other. After realizing the truth about the four of them, I couldn't help but almost laugh out loud. Hearing my words, Paul and Jane looked utterly devastated. But Emily, on the other hand, was fuming with rage.
Shut up. Someone who's not even family has no right to talk like that.
Oh, it's because I'm not family that I can be this honest. And really, for someone who doesn't do housework or have a job and got dumped by her husband, you sure talk big.
What are you saying?
Actually, back when Josh and I first got married, he once complained about Emily.
She was a stay-at-home wife, but she couldn't even handle housework properly. And when her husband told her, at least get a job, she totally lost it.
When I told that story, Emily shot a sharp glare at Josh.
What's that supposed to mean? Did you really say that about me, Josh?
No, that's not it. It wasn't a complaint or anything.
Enough, both of you. This isn't the time for this.
Shut up.
Jane tried to step in and mediate, but an enraged Emily closed in on Josh. Watching the two siblings argue, Paul scolded them harshly. Before long, the four of them were engaged in a full-blown argument. It was clear none of them even noticed my presence anymore. However, I couldn't let them keep causing such a ruckus in someone else's home. That's enough. You're disturbing the neighbors. Get out. I raised my voice from deep in my chest, shouting at the four of them. Emily turned to glare at me furiously.
Fine. I'll leave.
It's all your fault. Everything's a mess. Divorce was the best decision I ever made.
The two of them were clearly fuming with anger. Carried away by their anger, they stormed out of the house. The in-laws followed the other two out the door in a group. I quickly secured the door chain to ensure the four of them wouldn't return once they came to their senses. As expected, a few hours later, I heard familiar voices outside, but I ignored them. The next day, I changed the locks, ensuring that the four of them would never set foot in the house again. A week later, Josh came to collect his belongings, and the four officially moved out of my home. Apparently, after much pleading with extended family, they managed to find a place to live. Now, they are crammed into a tiny apartment without a bath. Josh continues to work in his dead-end job, but with such limited income, the in-laws had no choice but to start part-time jobs. Meanwhile, Emily remained steadfastly unemployed. Not only did she refuse to work, but she also refused to help with housework. On top of that, Emily apparently squandered Paul's retirement savings without permission, which ultimately led to her being kicked out of the house. After that, Emily reportedly showed up at her ex-husband's house demanding to reconcile, which ended with the police being called and causing a bit of a scene.
Emily is now dealing with the police, and even though she still refuses to work, life is unbearably hard. We're completely stuck. Hannah, will you give me another chance and take me back?
That was the message I recently received from Josh. Of course, I had no reason to respond, so I ignored it and blocked his number. While I was concerned that he might show up at my house, knowing my address, it seems, at least for now, that he hasn't made any attempts, likely deterred by Emily's recent incident. As for me, I've continued to throw myself into my work as usual. Some colleagues have been sympathetic and cautious around me since my divorce, but I feel absolutely no issues with it. In fact, I've been thoroughly enjoying my newfound alone time. I plan to work even harder to pay off my mortgage. Living alone allows me to dedicate time to chores, work, and my hobbies. And honestly, being single feels like the best thing ever. Marriage is something I'll never consider again. From now on, I'm going to enjoy a peaceful and carefree life.